For thousands of years, early human civilizations built their cities in isolated river valleys. They focused mostly on farming, tracking the stars, and keeping their local gods happy. Then, a Mesopotamian king named Sargon looked around and decided that ruling just one city was terribly inefficient. He wanted more pride, more power, and more possessions. So he began burying his neighbors under a singular rule, creating the first empire. Governing these massive, newly conquered populations required written rules to maintain order. Kings like Hammurabi began codifying laws, etching their commands permanently into stone so no one could claim ignorance. Around the same time, the Canaanites and Phoenicians realized that writing didn't have to rely on thousands of complex pictures. They assigned specific shapes to modular individual sounds, creating a highly efficient phonetic alphabet. A king's command could now be written down using a universal script and carried by a single messenger to every corner of a growing territory. As these empires grew, their borders inevitably smashed into one another. The Greeks, the Persians, and countless others spent centuries fighting brutally over the exact same strips of land. These connected territories became superhighways for abstract ideas. Buddhism radiated outward from India. Rome's massive infrastructure acted as an aggressive multiplier. Straight roads and sea routes built for troops allowed the teachings of a crucified carpenter to speed across Europe. The Romans tried to stop this ideological migration by outlawing the religion, burning Christians alive, and feeding them to lions. But those public executions only made the movement wildly popular. While the soldiers eventually marched home, they left behind a network of believers that would outlast the empires that built the roads. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed under the weight of migrating Germanic tribes, it left a massive power vacuum across Europe. Farther south, the Prophet Muhammad united fractured Arab clans under the new banner of Islam. Forbidden from fighting, these unified tribes turned their collective energy outward and swept across the map to build an empire stretching from Spain to India. European Catholics responded by launching wave after wave of holy wars. They marched into the Middle East to violently reclaim territory, convinced their sins would be forgiven in exchange for spilling blood. Then Genghis Khan arrived. The Mongols swept out of Central Asia and swallowed so much territory that they dwarfed every previous empire combined. This ruthless expansion forcibly linked the East and the West. Along with trade, this massive new corridor accidentally transported the Black Death, a plague that wiped out at least a third of the European population. Traumatized by disease and blocked from Eastern trade routes by powerful Islamic and Mongol empires, a desperate Europe had to find new ways to survive. The first breakthrough came with movable type. Johannes Gutenberg's printing press became the world's first mass media tool, distributing ancient knowledge quickly and cheaply. As people began reading the Bible for themselves, they started protesting the Catholic Church. This fractured European Christianity, igniting decades of bitter domestic warfare. To bypass Muslim-controlled spice routes, European explorers took massive risks. By sailing directly west across the ocean, they accidentally collided with the Americas. The Spanish arrived to find sophisticated native civilizations like the Aztecs and Incas. They conquered them mercilessly, extracting fortunes in gold and silver to ship back to Europe. To maximize this extraction, the Portuguese engineered a cold, cyclical economy. They treated human beings from Africa to work as slaves in the Americas, producing food and resources to trade for more goods back in Europe. Global isolation was dead. The continents were permanently stitched together through a relentless system of wealth extraction and human suffering. Back in Britain, people figured out how to harness steam power. Instead of relying on muscle or wind, machines could now manufacture goods, power travel, and wage war exponentially faster and cheaper. This technological multiplier allowed Britain to push its dominance across the globe, expanding a second empire deep into India and forcing open the ports of China. Other industrialized European powers raced to claim colonies, carving up the African continent into arbitrary borders, completely ignoring the complex ancient kingdoms there. To justify these rigid straight lines, Europeans leaned on bad science, claiming they were biologically meant to rule. This new machinery gave Sargon's original drive for conquest a global reach, allowing a handful of nations to claim nearly the entire planet. By the year 1900, the global map was almost entirely claimed. For the first time in human history, there was nowhere left for a growing empire to easily expand. The world was also shrinking. With telegraph wires actively sending signals across continents in minutes, every local dispute instantly became global news. And everyone was armed to the teeth. Industrial factories were churning out steel battleships, submarines, and artillery shells as these highly competitive empires prepared to fight. The only territory left to contest was the crumbling Ottoman Empire. It became the final, dangerous pressure valve for nations that demanded continuous growth. History is a relentless, compounding process. Thousands of years of ancient inventions and localized conflicts had cornered humanity into a crowded, heavily armed world, waiting for a single misstep to set the whole thing off.